Hi, welcome to this third part of the story of the Sistine Chapel. Um, we left off at the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, which was finished in 1512. Now, Michelangelo, of course, went on to do all kinds of other things, and he worked in Rome, outside of Rome, did a number of projects. Had the most frustrating time, by the way, in trying to finish the tomb for Julius II. Take forever, but at a certain point, years and years later, decades later, he came back to the Sistine Chapel. He wanted to paint one of the walls of it. And he had to convince the Pope to do so. He had to convince him because there were already paintings there. They were part of the original wall paintings. Remember, from the first time, there were the narratives of Moses on one wall, Jesus on the other, and they started on one of the shorter walls with the birth of Moses and the birth of Jesus. And those paintings were still there. And Michelangelo proposed to simply paint over them. And many people didn't like the idea, but eventually he convinced the Pope, which was Paul III by that time, and he convinced him that he would paint that. One of the reasons he wanted to do that is that he actually wanted another job as well. St. Peter's they'd been building at St. Peter's, but with very little success. Bramante had given up and died by that time, and several other architects had come up with ideas to build St. Peter's, but no one actually could, and they didn't trust anyone with the job. And Michelangelo, amongst many other things, had helped in the building of the Duomo in Florence. The Duomo, the Cupola itself, had been built, but he was put over the building, in charge of the building, for some time as well. So he said he understood the problem of building St. Peter's, which needed to have a very large dome. It would be a good idea to simply work in the Vatican for a long time and be part of the political process and know everybody and convince them that he had to build that church as well. It actually worked. He did. His next project would be to build St. Peter's. But he wanted to make a Last Judgement on the western wall of the Sistine Chapel, which is right over the altar. Now, the idea of painting or making a Last Judgement wasn't new. That's not the original part. That's not the new part of it. And I'll demonstrate that by showing you another Last Judgement. This is one a few centuries older, one made in Autun in southern France. It's made by a man called Guilebert. He actually signed it. And here you can see the basic parts of any Last Judgement scene. Of course, it's part of the biblical story of Revelations, where John the evangelist is told all these revelations about the end of times. In the center, you can see Jesus. He appears in what's called a mandorla. It's described as a rainbow of emerald that surrounds him, and he starts judging. Of course, first people have to be resurrected, and you can see that in the bottom bit they're being resurrected. I can show you with my cursor. This lower part is where they are resurrected. People are standing up from the being dead, and then on the left-hand side, right over here, you see some of them that have been found worthy of going directly to heaven and be amongst angels. And on the other side, they're still weighing. I'll show you a little bit closer up. Here's the weighing bit. You can see there's an angel here, and there's a devil here, and here there's there's scales, and souls are in there, and the devil's pulling them down, and because if you're the wrong weight, you will be taken to hell. Now that is what usually, in at least in the different parts, what a Last Judgment looks like. And Michelangelo did his own version, of course, which is different in many ways, but also similar in a number of ways. The difference is, of course, it's much bigger, it's in color, it's painted, and but what you can see is that on the left side, you see the resurrection of the dead. I'll show you in more detail and closer up in a minute. But in general, you see the resurrection of the dead over here. Then people are pulled upwards towards heaven by some people over there, and there's saints and those that have been saved are all up there. Jesus is in the middle, and he has this sort of powerful gesture with which he sort of seems to pull people up, and he's going to smash them down into hell in one motion, because on the right hand side below there, that's where people are moved off to hell. By the way, if you go into the Sistine Chapel, you enter through a door that's right below hell. So if you walk underneath, look back, you look right into hell. Now, here I have a more of a close-up of the resurrection of the dead. You can see they're being pulled out of their tombs, and some are standing up by themselves, and then they're the ones who are have been deemed righteous are being pulled up. Now, over that, you see the ones that have actually already made it to the top, and there they join the choirs of the saints. You can also see that there's quite a few people who are already there, holding various objects, and they identify them. You can see, for instance, there's a man here holding a cross, and that's a cross, not a Christian cross, but a cross like this, called an Andreas cross, and that makes him Saint Andreas, one of the apostles. And overhead, you see that there are the instruments of the Passion. So the cross, the crown of thorns is being held there. Someone holds the nails of the cross. Of course, in the center, you see Jesus in his most powerful movement. He's a very fit Jesus. He's very muscular. Everyone is very muscular. Even the ones that have gray hair have six packs. That's the sort of thing that really was fashionable in the 1540s. To paint it that way, anyway, and it would be copied by so many people for so long. It's the entire movement called Manierism. It's basically copying Michelangelo over and over again. And you can see some of the people who are up here. There's, of course, Jesus. Mary sitting right next to him, who's sort of frightened by the idea of all these dead people rising. You can see it's a bit violent for her. But just below Mary, you can see someone who seems to be holding a ladder. It isn't a ladder. It's a rack on which he was burnt. It's Saint Lawrence. He was put over a rack, and he was cooked over a fire, maybe barbecue, really. And he said that they could turn him over because one side was done, because he wasn't affected by the fire. That's also what gave him his name, because his color didn't change through the fire, just like laurel doesn't change color when it gets older. On the other side, you can see Saint Bartholomew. That's the man holding that piece of skin. In his other hand, the hand he's almost at the leg of Jesus, holds a knife, because Bartholomew was one of the disciples, and he was skinned alive. Some say that this particular skin that he's holding is a self-portrait of Michelangelo. It doesn't really look like anyone, so I'm not sure. But just above that, you see a man holding keys. That is St. Peter, of course. Now, below Jesus and below the scene of these saints, you can see angels blowing their trumpets. In Revelations, there's 7 angels blowing 7 trumpets, and various things happen during this blowing of trumpets. One of the things that happens is that people are judged according to how they appear in the book of life. And you can see that on the left-hand side, there's someone who has a small book pointed open towards the people who are being resurrected. And to the right, there's a much bigger book, and that's shown to the people going off to hell. So apparently more people are going off to hell than are saved. All the way to the right, there's a whole choir of saints, and the early martyrs are there as well. And there's a row of them here. 2 of the most famous are just below here. This man here holds arrows. That's Saint Sebastian. It's the 3rd saint of the city of Rome, after Paul and Peter and Paul, actually. And next to him is a woman. Yes, this is intended to be a woman. It is Catherine of Alexandria. She was tortured with an implement of wheels with spikes on them, and designed apparently by the emperor himself, because he really wanted to get rid of her. Her attribute is always a wheel with spikes, or a partial wheel with spikes. This, you can see all these nude people. There's hundreds of them. I think there's well over 140 full nudes on this painting, on this fresco. And many have asked if this isn't a bit weird to have in a church. So many, actually, that discussion started during the lifetime of Michelangelo, if this could actually be done. Even before the painting itself, the fresco itself was completed, people had already told him that there was too much nudity on it. Just below in this picture, you see someone on the way to hell, and I have here more up close. You can see this is someone being dragged down towards hell now, obviously regretting a lot of life's choices, and finding out that death isn't all that it was cracked up to be. There's, of course, these devils are pulling him down, and the snake biting him in the leg, and there's a lot of despair. Down there, and there's hell as well, and you can see Chiron beating people. There's the man over here beating people towards hell, and they're all being pushed towards this mouth of fire, all the sinners. And there's even one here in the corner, surrounded by a snake, and there's a story about him. When Michelangelo was almost done, he of course worked from top to bottom. I say of course because that's the logical way to do it. If you start at the top and work your way down, if you drip, you don't destroy what you've already done. That's pretty much the reason why you do that. And when he was almost done, when he was working on hell, Paul III, the Pope, came in with one of his secretaries, and they had a look at it. And the Pope asked his secretary if he liked the painting, and the man replied that he thought there was too much nudity, and he said it wouldn't do in a church, and it wasn't good. According to legend, Michelangelo then, as soon as they left, painted his face and gave him donkey's ears, because that is, of course, Midas from mythology. The King Midas, the Midas touch, the man who wanted everything that he touched turned to gold. He was also famously the man with the bad judgment of art. So that's why there's a face here of a man with donkey's ears, and it's supposedly that secretary of Paul III. He's also there's a snake wrapped around him that actually bites him in the penis. Now, when the whole thing was revealed to the public, that's the first time that this man saw himself in hell. And according to legend, he asked the Pope. He said to the Pope, "You have to change this. You have to order Michelangelo to remove my face. I can't be seen there, and not in this position." And Paul III, the Pope, replied that as a Pope he had a lot to say about heaven, but had no jurisdiction over hell, and so he's still there. But the discussion over all this nudity started before it was finished, and lasted for a long time. And in the 1560s, they started actually painting over it, and a lot of people's genitals have been covered by just bits of cloth. But over the centuries, there were several more prudish eras where they started to dress people. In some cases, just by painting over it, but in other places by carving away the original painting and replacing it with a new fresco. And the thing is, if it's just painted over, you can remove it. But if you have removed the original paint, of course you can't restore it. And in the last restoration, which was in the 80s, 90s, they tried to remove as much of the clothing as was possible. And now so it's closer to the original now than it ever was. But fashions will always change. It was opened to the public on the 31st of October of 1541, and Michelangelo reportedly said on that occasion, "How many artists will become blind copyists just because of this work?" And that sounds massively arrogant, and it is. But present at that ceremony were several people already making sketches of the Last Judgement, and within a month or two you could get copies of it printed all over Europe by mail order, actually. Figures from the Last Judgement you can find in paintings of at least another 80 years directly copied. It was so massively influential that even if you don't like it, it's still the one of the most influential works of art ever, and that makes it its own greatness in some ways. Now, this is as far as I go with this story. I would say listen to it again just before you go into the Sistine Chapel. Go there, and afterwards raise a glass of a nice Chianti to me, and hope to see you in another video. Bye.